Well, I found a way to read his tweet, and he said this. Today I announced the appointment of Mohammed Hashim as the new head of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation. With his experience in addressing systemic barriers and promoting inclusion, I am confident that he will carry out his mission brilliantly. Well, as the historian Robert Conquest taught us, the simplest way to explain the behavior of any bureaucratic organization is to assume that it's controlled by a cabal of its enemies. An example of that is the dairy cartel. They actually work to keep out dairy products, right? To drive up the price. Same thing with the taxi commissions. They work to keep out taxi competitors like Uber. So the Canadian Race Relations Foundation has just hired someone who is a full-time race hustler himself. Perfect fit for Justin Blackface Trudeau. I first heard of Mohammed Hashim when he jumped into action after the mass murder in Toronto a couple years back in Toronto's Greek neighborhood called the Danforth. Back then, a Muslim man named Faisal Hussein went on a shooting spree through the Danforth. He murdered 2 women, an 18-year-old named Reese Fallon and a 10-year-old girl named Juliana Kozis, and he wounded a dozen more. The strangest part was when Hussein saw people who were visible minorities. He told them they could go without worry. He wasn't going to murder them. It was only white folks in that neighborhood, maybe Greeks or Christians, that he apparently wanted to kill. He drove halfway across the city to go there to do his shooting spree. Hussein said to a local Sikh businessman, he said to that man, you can go, I won't shoot you. And that man reported that to Toronto Sun's Joe Warmington. Now, maybe a mass shooter has nothing to do with terrorism or race or religion or politics. There are murderers of every religion and race. Doesn't mean that their crime had to do with their religion or their race. But that was a curious thing he told that Sikh guy, don't you think? Now, within moments of the shooting, a Muslim spokesman presented himself to the media on behalf of the family. He told a beautiful story written in perfect English. And it was immediately picked up by all the mainstream media, hungry for a counter-narrative to the curious facts that suggested terrorism. He gave out this statement from the family. Here's some of the things it said. We are at a terrible loss for words, but we must speak out to express our deepest condolences to the families who are now suffering on account of our son's horrific actions, it said. Our son had severe mental health challenges, struggling with psychosis and depression his entire life. The interventions of professionals are unsuccessful. Medications and therapy were unable to treat him. And it was signed Hussein family. Did they write that? Did they write that? It's doubtful given how weak their command of English is. Did they even read it? And who in the Hussein family approved it, if anyone at all? Was any of that true? And why did all the media party run with it so quickly, so uniformly, without scrutiny? Well, Anthony Furey wrote this about it. Meet the spin doctor behind the Hussein family statement. It's a story in the Toronto Sun back then. Let me read a bit. The man who has presented himself as the point of contact for the family of Faisal Hussein is a professional activist who has reportedly committed himself to, quote, framing a new narrative of Muslims in Canada and creating a national political movement. Oh, so he's a spin doctor. So he's not a family friend. This is what he does professionally. He's an activist who saw a problem. Let me quote. The statement was provided by Mohammed Hashim, full-time organizer for the Toronto and New York Region Labour Council. Social media accounts belonging to Hashim show him heavily involved in supporting NDP candidates both federally and provincially in Ontario. He's also described as a driving force behind the National Council of Canadian Muslims. That's a Muslim Brotherhood-linked group. That's an excerpt from my daily show, The Ezra Levant Show. Every day I do a monologue on the news of the day, then I interview an interesting guest, and then I read my hate mail. You gotta subscribe. Go to rebelnews.com.